Hello, everyone. Today, I wanted to talk about a significant part of Tempo players' games, which is playing the Tempo mirror. It's roughly 15 to 20% of the metagame at any given point is some sort of Delver-based strategy that plays Delver Secrets and Wasteland, and has a bunch of cards like Daze and Force of Will and cantrips to tie those strategies together. So it's one of those things. I've been playing Canadian Threshold for about a decade now. And I feel like every time I play the Tempo Mirror, people prioritize the wrong thing. So I just had two excellent games in this league right here. I was playing against Sam and Teabag Tom. So we're going to look at the first game. One of them is... Our opponent is Sam51087. Hopefully you're in the Canadian Discord. And he was actually the third Canadian opponent I played in a row, and I'm also playing Canadian. So M20 is out. The London Mulligan rule is live. I'm not entirely sure what I shipped to the bottom. I think it was a True Name Nemesis, and because I realized that True Name, while it's good, a hand with double Daze is probably going to set me back mana, and I can always find one later with cantrips. So, I'm going through the game. We just do nothing the first couple turns. We don't need to do anything. We don't need to reveal what we're on, and I would much rather attempt to stifle his Polluted Delta, but then he plays Wasteland, which is good for us because that's a stifle target. So he correctly... Wastelands in our upkeep, forcing us to tap our green mana for our turn. We stifle, we play a land, and now now he knows that I'm playing Canadian. Him leading on Tropical and then fetching Volcanic, he knows that I'm on Canadian. Now, it's unlikely that I have two stifles, so worth noting is he just immediately snapped off the fetch to get his mana so he could not lose to stifle later down the road. And our hand is lining up to be just okay in the Canadian mirror. Daze is an excellent card. Spell Pierce is pretty good at countering cantrips, and we have Lightning Bolt. So he stifles our fetch, which leaves us on one land. But I'm not really worried about that. Drawing True Name Nemesis is pretty bad because we're not going to get to 3 mana anytime soon, but it's always a card that you could brainstorm away. So we attack with the Goose, pass it back, and at this point he has perfect mana. So he plays his own True Name, and then it's a race. Once again, we have no land. We can't do anything. We can't attack into his True Name. He has Ren. We pierce, he pays, we daze, and then he is going to win the race with his True Name. We're trying to resolve our own Ren here so we can potentially Wasteland him out of the game, but he has a second Wasteland and he can just run away with the game from there. When he plays the second True Name, there's no way we can do anything, so we pack it up. Now, game 2 is a little bit better because we're on the play, and being play-draw, this whole matchup is relatively play-draw dependent because we're playing 4 Wasteland, 4 Stifle. So it's very important that you, keep a hand that doesn't just get skunked by these strategies. So this hand is pretty good. On the play, it has a turn 1 threat, which can't get dazed, a turn 2 threat, which can get dazed, but it sets him back, and we have Wasteland. And if we find any mana source, then we can just loop Wasteland with Ren and run away with the game from there. So what this hand has is, this hand has a proactive strategy. It's the kind of thing that you need to have a plan anytime you're playing Tempo, and anytime you keep a hand, you should know likely how you're going to win the game, or at least how you're going to put yourself in a position to get into the long game, and then you can kind of figure out how you're going to cantrip and figure out closing out the game. So our opponent leads on Cantrip, which is nice, because that opens up the window to Wasteland him. He didn't just play Tropical Island Pass, but instead we prioritize playing a 2-3 Tarmogoyf. And the reason why is, if he wants to daze, then that really sets him back, and we can jam True Name Nemesis next turn and have our own daze. Or we can just commit a threat. Now, Tarmogoyf, notably here, does not die to Lightning Bolt because of Ponder and Land, the two subtypes in the yard. And if he casts Lightning Bolt, the Lightning Bolt actually goes to the graveyard before dealing damage to the Tarmogoyf, which would make him a 3-4. So I figured now is a good opportunity to cast Tarmogoyf. And he didn't have daze. Once again, our opponent has good mana. We Wasteland him off green. So the notable thing about the Canadian Threshold Mirror is that oftentimes it doesn't come down to Bolt. It oftentimes comes down to having green to deploy Tarmogoyf and Nimble Mongoose in the late game, because generally the matchup plays out in a way where there are very few threats. If you look at like Jonathan Alexander's lists, he often just plays 4 Delver, 4 Goose, and then like maybe 2 True Name, but like his list is very low creature density, and all he wants to do is keep the game in the beginning stages. He doesn't want your opponent to have 4 mana, otherwise you're probably losing. So we're pushing damage here because the games often come down to a race, and our opponent does nothing. And then he decides he's going to double Lightning Bolt our Tarmogoyf, which we're fine with. That's a 2-for-1. We are up. We have the same amount of cards, but I have a significantly better board state. And I think I have a better hand. Like, Spell Snare can counter Ren, it can counter Tarmogoyf, and Daze can deal with True Name Nemesis from the opponent's side right now. So drawing a second True Name hurts, but we need to keep pressing for damage. And at this point, I'm thinking maybe this game will go south. But we have the Spell Snare for his Ren, and then he has Pierce, and we have Daze. So we're right back to where we want to be. And I think we draw Wasteland this turn. No, we draw Fetch. So we jam our own Ren, and we immediately buy back Wasteland. Because the important thing in this matchup is not that the Goose has Threshold, but that your opponent doesn't have access to green. So very, very relevant. Always keep your opponent off green if you're playing the Canadian Mirror. There are certain other colors that you probably want to keep your opponent off of if they're playing like Grixis. Black, generally pretty good because you lose to Gurmag Angler. And there's nothing you can do against blue-red because they just have 4 basics. So our opponent plays True Name Nemesis. And now we need to figure out how to keep our opponent off green while jamming our own threats. So he unfortunately has the Daze for our True Name, but we have the second True Name for follow-up. He has to attack our Ren and 6 because we'll be attacking his mana base. So he cantrips. At this point, I feel like the game is almost lost once he deploys his own Goose. But so we Wasteland him, we rebuy the Wasteland, and the reason why we sequenced it like that is because when we Wasteland him and then we rebuy, I could have played this around the second Daze, but it's unlikely that he has the second Daze. If his exact last card is Daze, then hey, he probably has the match, but I know that this Ren is going to die next turn. So if I rebuy my Wasteland his 1 Tropical Island, and then rebuy it, play my True Name off of the Wasteland, then I know that I can permanently take him off green for the rest of the game. So that was my plan. I stuck to it. We knew that the Ren would be attacked for 3. We draw a Pyroblast, which is great because we have exactly the Pyroblast for his Stifle. And then we have exactly the Spell Pierce for his other Stifle. So the last 2 cards in his hand were Stifle. We shove, he trades because he's behind, and then we just run away with the game ahead on the clock, or ahead on life total. We save lands in our hand to bluff, and to potentially pitch to Brainstorm later. These are all very relevant things, and our opponent picks it up. But the demo froze because Magic Online. So we're going into game 3. We're on the draw. This game is a very good game. This is how you play tempo. Naturally, being on the draw puts you at a huge disadvantage, and this is the hand that I decided to keep. Because M20 is out, the London Mulligan rule is now live. So the card that I ultimately decided to ship back is Lightning Bolt. And my reasoning is if he has turn 1 Delver, then I have Pyroblast to answer that. And other than that, I'm going to need, because I'm going to be on the back foot, I am scared of a turn 2 Ren, but I have Force of Will, and I have cantrips to hopefully find land. So let's see how this game plays out. So we ship Lightning Bolt. Our opponent plays Tropical Island Ponder. And at this point, for turn, we draw Lightning Bolt. I don't know if this is a London Mulligan Moto bug or something, but we draw Lightning Bolt. So we fetch for Volcanic and Ponder, and we're looking for land. So we find Wasteland here. And the reason there was Wasteland, Tarmogoyf, and then another Ponder. And I could have shuffled and kept a random, but I would prefer just another land to Wasteland him if he Wastelands me. So there would be some, and then we would be drawing dead for 2 turns, and it sucks, but sometimes games play out like that. So I think that by taking this line versus 2 random cards, I could just never draw a land. If I get Wastelanded here, I'm likely losing. So we're going to see how these choices played out for me. So he pondered again, which kind of means I'm short on land, because he didn't play a land first. And he didn't play a land first, which would have ran into my days. So then he fetches immediately to play around Stifle. And then I draw a Wasteland. So we're going to ponder, and then ding, we find Tarmogoyf, Misty Rainforest, Wasteland. So we pick up the Misty, and now we have relatively perfect mana for the rest of the game. But we have this 1-turn window here where our opponent can do some powerful things. Obviously jamming Ren and playing around days. Like if they have another land, they can jam Ren. They can play Goyf. They can play Delver, Goose, or even True Name Nemesis if they have the 3rd land. And all we have is a Force of Will, and we can play around days by not wastelanding him there. So the decision was, do we want to wasteland now and lose to days, or do we want to take things a little bit slower and see what our game plan, how that's going to evolve, and hopefully we don't get punished by not wastelanding the green now. Because, like I said, game 2, very important, right? We took him off green, and we locked him with no Tropical Islands to end the game. But in this particular instance, I feel like having Wasteland and playing around days is marginally better than trying to take him off green. And we knew that we're drawing another Wasteland. So at this point, we snap the Wasteland off. We, in his upkeep, snap the other Wasteland off, and then he has no green. And at this point, I feel like I can't lose. Now, worth noting here, I don't play Tarmogoyf on my turn. And the reason why is because I don't want to run into days. I would much rather have up Spell Snare and Pyroblast and Bolt on whatever he would have and holding up Force of Will. So when you're ahead, like you really feel when he has 6 cards in hand as well, but you really feel when you're ahead in these tempo mirrors that you just want to sit back and do nothing. Like it's tempting to play a 3/4 Goyf, but what if the exact same thing from game 2? Where he double bolted our 3/4 Goyf. What if the exact same thing happened? Or worse, what if he just has days? Then we look pretty stupid for jamming that out. And then we also can't cast 4 cards in our hand. And we're just relying we're tapped out. We're relying single-handedly on Force of Will. And if he has another days, God forbid, then this just immediately gets blanked. So we decide to do nothing, and we're going to pass back. We're going to use the Pyroblast on his Brainstorm. I feel like that's a relatively good use of it. I think it was Cyrus Corman Gill tweeted, everyone says that Brainstorm is the best card in Legacy, and then they get mad when people Pyroblast Brainstorms. Well, that's the reason why you bring in Pyroblast in the mirror. It's not just to kill Delver or counter True Name Nemesis. It's because when they're trying to break out of this board state like this, we're trying to keep them locked down. And Brainstorm is probably the best way to get out of a board state like this. We don't want them seeing cards. We want to keep them oppressed. So we're going to crack a fetch here, and we're going to fire off Ponder, take a random draw, and then we have 1 turn with double days, Force of Will, and a blue card to pitch to it before we can start actually deploying threats. So we're hoping our opponent doesn't have any green, and they don't. So we're good. We play our Tarmogoyf. He forces it. We force back. He pierces. And that's good. That's fine with me. Again, we're going to do nothing here. Maybe old, less wise me would have played the Delver of Secrets right into the days. But in one of the cards, he force, pitch, force. And then you'll see what happens next turn. And I'm glad I didn't play the Delver, because it would have given him some equity with his days. So we play Delver, and it's fine. And then we play Nimble Mongoose, and then he plays Force, Pitching, Daze. So he did have the Daze all along. And at this point, I feel like very unlikely that we lose. But he finds Scalding Tarn, which means he finds green mana. So, but we also find our other Wasteland, and at this point, with 1, 2 tropical islands in the yard, and now 3, we know that most Canadian decks only play 3. We can permanently lock him under only having 1 goose. We have the Pierce for his Stifle. He dazes, returning the tropical, which is the correct play. And then it's very unlikely that we find our 4th Wasteland amount of the game. So at this point, I'm just going to have to count my losses, and he has double goose. And now the race is on. The only way that we win this race is by drawing Tarmogoyf for Lightning Bolt. And I figure I have 3 draw steps here to draw Lightning Bolt or Tarmogoyf or True Name Nemesis or my own Nimble Mongoose. And I decided that those are pretty good odds to keep pressing the matters instead of blocking. So the game plays out in a way such that by prioritizing removing his green, we manage to keep him down, and then we draw Lightning Bolt to close the game out with Spell Pierce, Spell Snare, and Daze backup. So that was a very good game. Obviously, that came down to a race, and we got lucky to draw Lightning Bolt at the end, but I feel like we played that game properly with prioritizing Wasteland. We never had Ren that game. We didn't need it, clearly. But we prioritized Wasteland and didn't give him value in his cards by playing around Daze. So, very, very important. Now, another game that was good was a game versus Teabag Tom. Don't look at my constructed rating. We're going to go into game 2 here. Teabag Tom is a player who plays a lot of Canadian, has in the past. And guy just grinds leagues a lot. So we're in game 2. We are sideboarded. Let's take a look at how this game plays out. So game 2, I feel like this hand is pretty okay. We won game 1, so that means we're on the draw. But this hand is relatively Wasteland proof, which is one of like the 3 criteria that I want. I want a hand with cantrips, a hand with some sort of permission, or like not permission. I want a hand with cantrips, I want a hand with land, or I want one of those hands with like double Delver, just like this, that's going to be completely busted. So our opponent plays Delver. We go Trop Delver in true mirror match fashion. And so you need to consider what does the play Wasteland first, then Brainstorm mean? It means that there's a really good chance he's trying to flip his Delver, and he doesn't want his Brainstorm to get dazed, so his Brainstorm is very important to him. We didn't have Daze anyways, but neither here nor there. He snaps off Wasteland, so I know that it's very likely his Delver flips. So when he attacks here, I'm actually somewhat surprised that he offers that. So I take the trade because I know that I have more land than him, and I have a second Delver, and I also have a follow-up Tarmogoyf. So, and Tarmogoyf stonewalls his Nimble Mongoose, but we draw Renin 6, and from there, the game is... Renin 6 is a very, very, very powerful card. People are comparing it to Deathrite Shaman, and I don't blame them. It facilitates a very similar role. Drawing Lightning Bolt is huge there. We have exactly the Pierce for his snare, and now we can just ride Renin 6's card advantage into the ground. Ultimately here, we decided to... Oof, I wish I can go back. So we had Tropical Island in play. Ren at 4. Tarmogoyf was a 3/4. We could have blocked, and but Ren still would have been at 1 loyalty, so he would have had to burn the bolt regardless. And I figured I'd rather be up a Tarmogoyf because I can block his goose for days, and I also still have bolt in hand. So inevitably, when I attack or he attacks and I block, then I can bolt his Tarmogoyf. So normally I'm not the kind of guy to do creature math outside of increments of three twos. But in this particular instance, this is a race that I'm comfortable winning. And I main phase Brainstorm here because he has 0 cards in hand. I'm just trying to keep my head above water, keep treading, and try and find more permission, because inevitably he will find spells. And how he gets back in this game is by like going runner, like land, True Name Nemesis, and then he can just block. Like, he can stonewall my Tarmogoyf. So I feel like I tapped the wrong land here. I should have tapped Tropical, but I was also expecting some amount of Nimble Mongoose. We daze his Ponder, of course we do. As a Delver player, we snap, take that trade any day. And then he has no cards in hand. We resolve True Name Nemesis, and then we take the game over from here. And that we have our own Tarmogoyf wall, and we have a 3/1 attacker every turn. And because we have double goose, I'm more than happy to trade the Tarmogoyf here. And this game is pretty much over. So I keep the Ponder for a blue card to pitch to Force of Will. I deploy another Tarmogoyf, Nimble Mongoose, and then we're basically just sitting back on Force of Will to counter the only relevant thing you could have, which would be, I'm pretty sure nothing at this point, but maybe something that blocks Nimble Mongoose. We're turning we're turning Force of Will, pitch, Stifle into a Lightning Bolt, because all we need is 3 more damage. So he goes to bolt himself, I bolt him, and then he bolts himself again in response, and we talk a little bit about the matchup in Force of Negation. So, game 1 of this same matchup. I saw his name and assumed he was playing Canadian, because frequently he has been known to in the past, so we just lead on Innocuous. I could be playing anything, fetch lands, sneak and show, whatever, right? And just try and trick him into assuming that we're not on Canadian, because maybe we'll draw Stifle. And at this point, this game is actually quite fun. So he has the Force of Will for my True Name. I had the Force for his Force, and then he had the Force for my Force. This is like some vintage stack stuff. And then his turn, he fetches 3 times and plays his own True Name Nemesis. So he does exactly what I did. And now the race is on, so we find the second Delver, so we can jam this around Wasteland. And the reason why, so interesting enough, every game you have to look at, how do I lose this game? Generally, that's the best question you could always be asking yourself. How do I lose this game? And the answer is, well, I'm not going to take him off green like I have been in the normal strategies. But if he just has like bolt, 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 or something like obnoxious like that, because we had Delver, Delver, what's stopping him from having like bolt, bolt, bolt? If he has that, then he's winning the game. He's winning the race. So it's one of those things where, in this particular instance, you decide to take him off of red, because that is one of the ways that you lose. So, interestingly enough, him playing Nimble Mongoose, the 1/1 goose, was enough for me to get some equity on our days. And he tried to stifle our Delver trigger, but we dazed it, and Delver flips to Brainstorm. And now it's just a straight race. We draw Lightning Bolt, which effectively means that he can't crack this fetch, because the Lightning Bolt. Once this is through and 6 damage, put him at 4. And then he would go to 3. So we're sitting on lethal. We know we have lethal because you can't burn us out now. And we draw a double bolt. So, and yeah, so that's the game. Canadian Threshold concepts in general. Prioritize what you're wastelanding. Always attempt to play around days unless you absolutely can't. And win races with lightning bolts. That's what I recommend. But all of these games are a very good showcase on playing the mirror match, how you need to approach the mirror match, prioritizing cantrips. You'll see me a lot just like, oh, I have a Ponder in hand and I'm not going to cast it. Or Brainstorm. Like, I could have Brainstorm there to put me ahead, but why would I cast Brainstorm, right? Brainstorm is the best card when it's never cast. So these are all things to consider. And yeah, hopefully you learn something and you can level up your tempo game.